Hi, my name is Carolina Brown. I am a transgender woman, pronouns are she, her. I was born in Tampico, Tamaulipas, Mexico. These days I am a chocolate maker. I am a follower of cacao spirituality. I became involved with this spirituality to deal with mental, spiritual, and physical health after I had undergone my gender affirming transition. I realized that I needed a new path to follow. I needed something to hang on and something that could help me live this new life as the full woman that I am. I moved from Mexico to Canada in 2001 after working as a sailor, I suppose you can call it, for a while in the West Coast in Mexico, where I have moved from the East Coast, where I was born, after I graduated as a marine merchant pilot. I was working for a brief stint on tuna fishing boats. It was a beautiful adventure, swimming in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with dolphins, and also meeting other queer sailors that were on the boat. We made a really good connection there, being stranded for 45 days in the middle of the ocean. Then I worked in ferry boats, transporting people from inland Mexico to the Baja Peninsula. And there I met a fellow sailor who told me of a place called Vancouver, Canada, where he had worked on ferry boats too. And I wanted to see that place for myself, but I didn't have enough money at the time. So I waited for the right opportunity to come, and that opportunity presented to me in an unfortunate tragedy that happened September 11, and nobody wanted to fly at the time. So I figured out that maybe airplane tickets would be cheaper, and they were 50% off. I ended up paying for an airplane ticket where I flew by myself. I was the only passenger after almost being sunk on a boat that took me to this airplane. And after I arrived in Vancouver and living by those precious mountains by the ocean, I decided to take a bus that took me to this place that people kept bad-mouthing in Vancouver. They didn't seem to have very good feelings about a place so-called Toronto. So I wanted to see it for myself, and I took the cheapest way to travel to Toronto, which was a Greyhound bus at the time. And I traveled for 3 days through the Rockies, through the plains, through all of the beautiful towns. And when I finally made it to Toronto, I got a chance to experience my very first Pride March, and I fell in love right away with the city and with all the opportunities to be fully the person that I am openly. And I've been living here since. It's been 22 years since. Yeah. To speak about my identity, it's a very lengthy conversation, because I suppose the brief version of that would be I am a transgender woman. I guess if I speak of it from an indigenous perspective, I am a two-spirit person. Yet again, due to colonization, I don't really identify as an indigenous person, even though I know my background and even though I hold on indigenous traditions. I had a few years ago gender confirmation surgery, so I'm assuming that qualifies me as a transgender person. Yet again, I've come to terms with the fact that I lived for many years before inside many boxes, and the last thing I wanted was to get inside another box. So if someone looks at me and uses he, but they treat me honorably and respectfully, I am perfectly fine with that. If somebody looks at me and uses she, her pronouns, of course that's gonna bring a big smile in my face, because I will know that they see me fully as the person that I am. In other words, even though I am very aware of my identity, I am more interested in people valuing the quality of the content of what I carry inside, because that holds more value to me than someone using the right pronouns and still mistreating me. The biggest challenge I had in the last few years, yeah, I know this is a good answer because it's making me feel emotional. And that's how I usually know that this is what I really want to say. Allow me to open up my heart. Going back home was difficult. The very first time I returned, I had been living in Canada already for a decade. And I went for a month. I got a chance to see my maternal grandmother one last time before she passed away. I didn't know that she was sick. It's just how things turned out. But I'm happy that I got to say goodbye to her. And then after that, I took another decade to go back. Though this time, it wasn't really of my own choosing. It was more like I was told that I should go back. I had already undergone my surgery. I had already been openly living as a transgender woman for several years. So now it was about reclaiming my soul, my spiritual connection to my roots. And in order to do that, there was no way to do that from afar. I needed to go there. I needed to be at those places. I needed to carry those ceremonies. I needed to take on those medicines. I needed to speak to those elders. And when I was told that I needed to do this, I thought to myself, how am I gonna do this? Like, people are gonna, harm me. My country unfortunately has the second place in the entire continent as the place where most people like me get murdered in very violent ways. And I didn't want to expose myself to that. But I also wanted to reclaim that connection. So I had to make a very, very hard decision for a second, for a split, moment that I would be traveling there. I needed to once again get sort of inside that closet so I could travel around safely without people doing, anything aggressive towards me. And I knew who I was inside. I knew that I would do this for the time being just so I could travel around. And travel I did for 6 months after being away for so long. I had the unfortunate experience of being detained 10 years before in Toronto during a protest during the G20. And I, like 1,000 other people, got 10 years later compensation for that illegal detention that we were subjected to. And that was another concern for me, how I was gonna travel without having the funds. And out of the blue, a lot of money came my way, and I realized that I had no excuse anymore to travel. So, as I had been told by my guides, my spiritual guides, the resources are gonna come, and they came. So I took that as a sign, okay, I gotta do this. Whoever, trans ancestor way back when wants me to come back and pay, honor to them. And I eventually, after traveling through mountains and going to the ocean, to caves, to speaking to so many people, I eventually got to a cacao plantation in Tabasco, Mexico, where I met whom is my current elder at the time. And most important of all, the person who was cooking there was a beautiful, raging queen that as soon as I saw her, I realized this was the right place for me to come to, because here they love us, here they accept us, and here there is a space for us. And they call us flores, flowers, and I'm happy to be a flower of that plantation too. I'm very much of a loner in many ways. That's probably not the right term, because I love people. I love being amongst them. I love making community. These days I am inviting people into my community. Most of us as queer and trans people frequently don't have access to ceremony. We even, I need to admit to this, even in, indigenous communities, sometimes, there is, we are ostracized, there is, a certain rejection. That is, what colonization also did to us, whereas, for millennia, people like us were accepted and were, respected, and we had specific roles. Even nowadays, there are some spaces where people don't welcome us because, they've already been told that that is not a good thing. So part of the communities that I am trying to be part of, trying to create, are, one where people know here you're welcome, the way I was, received in my communities, in Tabasco. At the same time, I spend a lot of time by myself. I may, spend one day of, engaging with the community, and I know that I need to spend the rest of the month on my own to recharge. I feel much more comfortable when I engage with one person at a time, because I feel that I can give myself fully to that person, and I can also get fully, what that person is offering me as well too. I recently, however, decided to come out of that shell for a second, calling it a shell is probably not the appropriate way, because when I say that I need to recharge, I love spending time in nature. And see, that's a community too. You engage, with everything that is there, the animals, the trees. Spending time in nature is something that I love. That is a community that I also, I think, we should also consider it a community. There are some spots, where I like to go visit the local fauna, the beaver who lives by that, river already knows me, because, I always bring some offerings. There's some deer, who are not bothered anymore when I'm camping there. The trees there, I feel like they know my presence. So that is my community too. But speaking of human communities, recently I made the decision of venturing out once again back into the 519, where I met some lovely transgender women, one of whom was generous enough to invite me to be part of this project. And that is why I am here today. I venture all the way to Kitchener, which where I had never been to, and so far I'm liking it very much. It's beautiful here. There's a lot of nature, which is a way to get my attention right away. First of all, I want to clarify that Two-Spirit is an indigenous identity. So since I do not identify as indigenous, given that I know my background, but there are protocols. Communities have to claim you as one of their own. And because my own communities don't, for that reason, out of respect to their own protocols, I don't identify as indigenous. And at the same time, for that reason, Two-Spirit being an indigenous identity is one that I know that in many ways I could fall under that umbrella, but I don't use it to identify myself. Yet again, to speak of Two-Spirit people is an umbrella. It's an umbrella for basically what nowadays we would call queer and trans people. And in different indigenous communities, they have specific names for people whom fall outside of the binary of man and woman. In some communities, those identities would be assigned depending on the abilities that one had. Let's say if one was good at child rearing and yet, presented somewhat like what would be understood as a male, they would be like, okay, the indigenous word for this person is a male who behaves like a woman, or a woman who behaves like a man, or someone who can move from one side to the other. And back in Mexico, where I come from, in the state of Oaxaca, in a beautiful place called Juchitán, there is a Two-Spirit identity from the Zapotec indigenous people. They call themselves Mu-Shay, and the Mu-Shay are very well respected in their families. The families who happen to have a Mu-Shay child in their lineage, they treasure them very much. Frequently, they have the task of looking after their elders. It's one teaching that I got a few years ago, and only now I feel like I am internalizing it. And it is still difficult, but gradually, maybe age, maybe experience, maybe a combination of factors, it's slowly sinking in within me, within my heart. And it's that teaching of unconditional love. I feel like for us, for many people, but to speak specifically of what I am as a transgender person, as a woman, as a person of color, as an immigrant, as a person who faces mental health challenges, as a person who engages in spirituality, because that's also not looked very well in some corners. Sometimes it's hard to forgive others for the ways in which they look down on us, the ways in which they actively harm us, the ways in which sometimes there's lateral violence, as they call it. Sometimes that harm comes from within our own communities too, because we have very narrow ideas of what a transgender person should look like, or what a queer person should be. And I think at the same time, the reason for which I practice and I invite everyone who's listening and watching to this to engage in forgiveness and unconditional love is because at the end of the day, whatever hatred, let's call it that way, is directed at you, it's like a seed that's being planted in your garden, and it is up to you to choose if you want that to grow within you. And if you let that grow within you, you are the one who has to carry that burden. I carried for a lot of time that burden on my shoulders, and it was very heavy. That, desire to retaliate, to get back at people for mistreating me, for not understanding, for being so narrow, for not showing any empathy towards me. And now I realize that I cannot allow that to grow within me. I want to leave this place behind as a transgender woman who lived openly, who lived happily, who shared as much as I could with everybody else. And if people think that that is naive because I'm not fighting back, if people think that I am, a fool because I'm not, speaking back at people with hurtful words, well, that's the path. I know what my path is, and my path is one of living with love. I wanted to transition not because I wanted, to use my identity in order to harm others, but rather because I wanted to see for other people that it's possible to be like us. It's possible to be everything that we want to be. It's possible to be spiritual, and it is possible also to just, live without any hatred towards any being, human or otherwise. Yeah, that's what I think. Just love, forgive yourself, for the years you wasted waiting to have the right conditions to live as you are. Sometimes those conditions are not gonna present themselves. You have to make them. You have to create the space where you can fully thrive, be like a jaguar, like the elders say, a creature of the night that now and then shows you spots so the world can enjoy your beautiful presence. But when it gets a little bit, unfriendly, just find your way back into nature, and from there watch them all and observe them all and pray that their hearts open up so that they can enjoy your presence once again when you merge in their communities. Yeah, that's what I can say about that. See, I grew up as Catholic. That is how I was raised. But I was always that child who was always asking too many questions, right? And I believed, I had that within me, that fervor, that religious fervor. But I would also, notice, things. And I was always asking questions, about all of these contradictions, about, the frequent hypocrisy, of some of, my people older than me, who would say the one thing that they would do the opposite, right? So eventually, I grew disillusioned from that. And I moved away, from the church, right? So for the longest time, I was looking, for other, places where I could, have any sort of, faith. And it wasn't until, now that I finally, I'm reclaiming my indigenous, traditions, that I realized that there's a huge difference between faith and indoctrination, right? People, who are using, their religious beliefs in order to, either, get your money, or, get you to do things that are probably against your interest, or simply, to control you, in a way that they determine, that should be, the way that you should move, around the space. I personally, advise you to walk away from that. And sometimes, that means having to walk away from family, having to walk away, from close friends and relatives. And it's a painful process, but it's a necessary one. On the other hand, when you create strong and meaningful relationships with people who teach you, people who show you how to be a better human being, how to be an honest human being, how to be a responsible person, how to be the best version of yourself that you can be, where you create a relationship that is reciprocal, where I give as much as I am receiving, right? Those are the kinds of, spiritualities or religious beliefs, if you may call them, that I personally advise you to engage with. And I'm bringing this up because for me as a transgender person, on, my days, when I get sad, when I get, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be doing this anymore. This is the one thing that keeps me going. I'm like, what? I'm just gonna, sit down, light up a candle, light up my incense, make my chocolate, drink it, give thanks because I am still here, give thanks and ask, for the queer and trans people, for all other people, who are oppressed, to be living, free of harm, living with abundance of joy and health, living with lots of love and harmony and peace. And for that reason, for me, it is important to have a connection to spiritual beliefs. So if it is, something that you come to because, not because you were forced to, but rather because, deep in your heart, you feel like this is something that helps me, anchor myself, to plant myself well on the ground, then it is, worth it to having something, that you can, go back to whenever you feel alone, whenever you feel unsupported. It is, as my elders say, your ancestors are always with you, they're always watching you. And we have transistors too, one day I will be gone, one day all of us will be gone. And hopefully, I will be the right kind of person that some people will call me, at those moments, in their prayers. And hopefully, if that is true, I will be able to come back and bring them that, calmness, that joy that I feel that now some of those transistors bring me whenever I engage that way. Yeah. I suppose the first thing that I would like to share with queer and trans people in Canada, as a Mexican Canadian person, now I have lived half of my life here and half of my life there. Well, do travel to my country. You are gonna find a lot of dates there. First of all, there's, sometimes this idea, like queerness or transness exists only in North America. There's so much of it all over the world. And sometimes, the community can be small enough that it seems that we have already dated each other so many times. So maybe let's start traveling, so we are, meeting new people and creating those, bonds. And I think at the same time, in many other places, they have their own histories, they have their own stories, of fighting back, and a way in which we can enrich our, our communities is by learning about what's it like to be queer in Mexico, what's it like to be trans in this little rural town, in the middle of Saskatchewan. I don't know, I've never been there. I want to learn that experience, right? I want, for people to learn what it's like, to be a trans woman in, the middle of this rural town, in Tabasco, and eating tacos at 2 a.m. after you come, from the bar, that you were dancing, with your friends. I would like, for us to share those experiences. I want you to invite me, to little town, in the middle of the prairies, where you can, you can show me, how you celebrate yourselves, and I can show you, I can give you some of my medicine, it's chocolate. Everybody loves chocolate. I love traveling. Yeah. One reason why I fell in love with the medicines that I carry now is because, in a way, this is a two-spirit medicine, right? We think of this, cacao, as a feminine spirit, and we think of this corn as a masculine spirit, and we drink them together, and that's how we bring balance, right? So in a way, that's what we as trans people are. We are the balance, between those spirits. Yeah. So see, that's me coming all the way from Mexico here to tell you this is how we celebrate ourselves. How do you celebrate yourselves in Nunavut? How do you celebrate yourself in Manitoba? I don't know. I've never been there. I want to travel there. I want to know. So invite me there. I would travel there, and I would take you to Mexico too, so we can, celebrate ourselves all over the world.
For a moment, life doesn't seem quite so bad. For a moment, I kind of forgot to be sad. He turns night to day, but don't down your guard, let them into your heart for